Welcome to the show. My guest today is Professor Mark Rector, author of O Canada, Our Home and Inventive Land, a book that celebrates more than 200 inventions with Canadian roots, now in its fourth printing. Mark, in your book, you jokingly call Thomas Edison a patent troll, and that Canadians, you say, deserve credit for inventing the light bulb. Set the record straight, Professor Mark. Who really invented the light bulb?
Well, if you go to Wrongopedia, they give credit to Edison doing it in 1878. But if you look through my book, you can actually find the actual patent application and the original schematic and the patent awarded to Matthew Evans and Henry Woodward. Henry Woodward was a medical student at U of T. Henry Woodward was a Toronto innkeeper down in the south end of Scarborough. And they lived side by side next door to each other, and they loved to experiment with physics and do stuff. And so back in 1874 at the Morrison Brass Company in downtown Toronto at Adelaide Street, they managed to perfect the very first light bulb. Of course, many people were trying to do this. Swan in England, Edison was working on it and came up with many failures. But Evans and Woodward were the first to do it, and they tried to raise the capital here in Canada, but that was a little bit difficult in the early days. I mean, for a lot of the 18th century, this was a small little colony with not a lot of money here. I mean, they were using playing cards for money for a while there, and difficult to raise the capital. They tried for a few years, and they couldn't get the money raised, and so they kind of ran out of steam, and so they ended up selling the patent to Thomas Edison for the princely sum of $5,000. 6 months later, the headline in the New York Times: Edison invents light bulb. So fake news is not just a recent occurrence. Edison was getting credit back then. So wow, he took the credit forever after. And to further the story, another interesting angle that many people don't know. So he goes to put it into production. Edison does. And only a few years later, another Canadian, Reginald Fessenden, working in obscurity for George Westinghouse and the Westinghouse Company, who's just one of their scientists, he actually comes up with one of the most important perfections of the light bulb in terms of the making it last. And they came up with the long-lasting light bulb, thanks to Reginald Fessenden, a Canadian who invented radio. And those light bulbs were the ones they used to light the Chicago World's Fair, which gave Chicago the name the White City. Because that World's Fair was quite famous. It was a big technological fair, and that was all in the back of Fessenden's work, improving on Matthew Evans and Henry Woodward's work that Edison took credit for.
It's incredible, and talk about sort of untold or underreported stories. And if anyone missed it earlier, Mark referred to Wikipedia as Wrongopedia. I like that. But back to Evans and Woodward, who patented the light bulb. You said, Mark, that the investor support wasn't there, and that's it came down in great part to that. Do you find that to be the case today? How about Canada's willingness to support invention and innovation? Have you, throughout your historical research, noticed that changing over the years?
Well, things are certainly better today. Like I said, a lot of my stories, I mean, as you say, there's over 200 of them in there. They go all the way back to the 1600s. I mean, this was a very, very small colony. They're trying to eke out an existence, portaging around 2 million lakes hard by the Canadian Shield, and, scrabbling out an existence in the Dust Bowl west of the 100th meridian where the Great Plains begin. It was a lot of people scattered across this country. And thanks to John A. Macdonald's national dream and the last spike, we get a railroad and connect everybody up. But it still was very tough to raise capital. I mean, nowadays, different story. We got the TSX venture exchange. There's a lot more finance and money here now, obviously. So we're definitely a big player on the world stage today. So I think you definitely have a much easier time than many of the people in my book. Back the early days, but it's certainly a lot easier now. But early on, they struggled, and hence why so many of us. You talk about the brain drain we had in the 90s of Canadians leaving. You look at a lot of the inventors in my book in the 1800s, and they had no choice. They just couldn't get the capital, couldn't get the traction, and unfortunately, we've had a bit of a history of not celebrating our own and knocking down our own. I don't know why we don't, wave the flag and toot our own horn more. We really need to do that more with our Canadian successes. And that was the whole reason behind doing the book. I got tired of all my students asking about stuff in American textbooks saying that the Americans invented everything. I mean, there's a great quote in 1843 from the Patent Office Commissioner, Henry Ellsworth, that everything that can be invented has been invented. And this American said this in 1843. Well, I want to send him a copy of my book posthumously because I think the man needs to read it. We invented everything long after he said there was nothing left to invent. So,
well said, Professor Mark. And I also think we could all, thread some tragically hip references into our answers too. Don't think I didn't catch that. So
you were listening.
So you mentioned your students, asking about or inspiring in part the need for this book. So it's true. Your book is the first of its kind, certainly in terms of its breadth. How come no one thought of this before? It does make you wonder. Do you think Canada can do a better job of celebrating its inventors?
That's a great question. When I saw the need for this, because I've been a junkie on this for a long time. I've got every Canadian invention book you can rhyme off from back to the 1940s. Every time I see one in a used bookstore, I buy it. And of course, that formed a lot of my research early on. And then I went across the country to every museum, and I actually went and met with Alexander Graham Bell's surviving family members. I went to Marconi's site. I went to the cable station in Newfoundland. I went to all these places, crisscrossing the country doing the research. And none of the other books did anything close to what I was trying to do. Most of the books I have, they cover 10 or 12 or 15 inventions. One of them, the Great Compendium, had like 25. And I said, this is crazy. Like, I had so many of these in my head. It started out as a stack of handouts for my students to try and make electronics interesting. I mean, stuff was dry as toast and put anybody to sleep. So I said, I got to find something exciting and interesting. And I knew Bell did the telephone. I knew about Reginald Fessenden inventing voice radio because that was my expertise. I was a telecommunications technician in the police force. And so I knew about those two. And so I was teaching the telecom courses. So they were a natural fit. So I came up with a little handout about those two guys. And then every time I got another course, I said, I got to see if there's something Canadian related. Found the alkaline battery for DC circuits. I found the fact that we invented the trackball, which is an upside down mouse for the computer course. And it just kept growing from there. And by the time I had a stack about 6 inches high, we were honored up in Ottawa, me and my students, for a big thing we did years ago. And a guy there who was a grandson of one of the inventors, the guy on the cover of my book, and Frederick Gisborne, and he said, how'd you inspire these students? I said, I gave them all these handouts about Canadian inventors like your great granddad. And he said, wow, that'd make a great book. And I went,
there you go.
Took me 9 years, but I finally got around to it.
Yeah. There was your light bulb, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you mentioned Alexander Graham Bell. When most people think Canadian inventions, we can check those boxes, right? They think the telephone, they think insulin. More recently, they think the Canadarm and the BlackBerry, all things to be proud of. Many know that lacrosse, hockey, and basketball were invented by Canadians. But Mark, I didn't know about the odometer, the hot and cold mixing faucet, peanut butter, the walkie-talkie, the CPR dummy, Botox.
You've read a lot of this book. This is great.
I have, and I'm just giving the highlights, and I want everyone to get the book and read more about who is behind it. The jet airliner, Mark. All first in Canada.
Yeah.
So, all first in Canada. There are so many inventions, and again, in the book, 200 or more. Can you talk about one or two of your favorites?
Oh, geez, how long is your show? This could be a problem.
Just one or two of your top favorites.
It's really tough. I mean, I love the story of Elsie McGill. I mean, this wonderful, amazing, tough Canadian woman, 3 degrees by the time she's 22, 23 years old. All of them obtained after a doctor says you'll never walk again. She had polio. And if that wasn't enough, after getting 3 degrees, she basically goes on to become the only woman in history to single-handedly design an airplane all by herself. The Maple Leaf 2, never to be done again, because she sat on the international body to write the regs and said, hey, you better get more than one engineer. She was responsible for redesigning the Hawker Hurricane, which essentially helped win the war. She formed the National Action Committee on the Status of Women to promote women's interests and many, many other things. So she's an amazing story. I'm going to keep telling Elsie's story until I get her on a dollar bill, damn it. It's my little mission in life, but she's a great one. There's so many others, but I think if I had to name a couple of favorites, Fessenden's close to my heart because I was a radio technician. But two that I really was very proud of is the two centerpieces in the book. I figured I'd highlight the two greatest companies, Northern Telecom and Spar Aerospace. The Canadarm, of course, came from Spar Aerospace. Northern Telecom, every single back-end telephone system invention came from them. In fact, 6,000 inventions and patents from one company. That's got to be a world record. And most of all the cellular technology that we use today, LTE and all these other things, GSM and all these things you've probably heard buzzwords of, all done by Northern Telecom. So I highlighted those two companies, but I was very lucky to actually know two of what I call the unsung heroes. To me, the personal stories are what make the book. And I really tried hard to get that from the inventors. I mean, who cares about these technical numbers? That just bores people. So I focused on the human interest stuff. And so the two guys, I picked out two, one from each company that I actually knew. And I asked them, I said, can I profile you and what you did in your career to put you in the book? And luckily they both agreed. And so to me, the two unsung heroes, Rick Cosby from Northern Telecom and Peter Villalta from Spar Aerospace. These two guys didn't get their name on a patent. They didn't get their name in a paper. They didn't get rich. You know, they just went to work every day and they did the emails and soldered the circuits and, you know, used the multimeter to test voltages. And Peter Villalta and him and a whole bunch of other people built the Canadarm. That's what Peter did. That was part of his career. And Rick Cosby built the DMS 100s and, in fact, numerous other Northern Telecom telephone switches. And this is the reason today that we have call waiting, call display, call forwarding. You know, the reason the whole 90s we were able to dial up and connect to the internet on the phone, well, that's because of that DMS 100. Probably means nothing to most people, but that digital telephone switching system that gave our country and put us on the map as the #1 telecommunications country in the world all came from the hands of Rick Cosby and 6,000 other unsung heroes at Northern Telecom. And so that's why I dedicated those sections to those unsung heroes. I was only able to mention a small handful of names, but the stories of what Peter did and what Rick did day to day to get those inventions out to Canadians, I mean, it just is mind-boggling. There's just amazing stories of the two of them. Rick working in a sweat box, 150 degrees, trying to bake the heck out of this system to see if it would stand up to the rigors of working in a telephone switching office. And Peter going to Houston and sitting at the control, the mission control, and they had a glitch and the Canadarm stopped working. He says, you haven't lived until 22 people in NASA's mission control turn and look at you and go, huh?
Yeah, we've seen that. Yeah,
that was a real moment for him. And so there's some other great stories like that in the book of those two guys, and they're pretty close to my heart because I call both of them two very close friends, and I really admire and look up to those guys.
What's terrific, and I like in the book how you spend some time diving into biographies of several inventors. Now, a little more on that, if you don't mind. Like, what have you noticed in terms of, you know, I'm hearing from you just now, you know, there's this, you know, willingness and interest in tinkering, right? And figuring things out, certainly dealing with failure, persevering. What else are some common characteristics that you've noticed over the years and over what you've researched, going back 100 years or more of inventors? What are those common qualities?
Well, that's a great question again, because I did see some similarities. And one of the things that stands out with a few of them, Fessenden, Bell, and a couple others, is there's a little bit of eccentricity. I mean, people that are very driven and genius, there's an old adage about there's a fine line between genius and insanity. But the perseverance thing, the stick-to-itiveness, the quirkiness, a couple of great Canadian quotes for you. Wayne Gretzky said that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And what a great way to put it to somebody trying to do something when you think you've failed, 4,000 times. It's the 4,002nd that's going to all of a sudden work. You now know 4,000 ways it doesn't work. You're running out of ideas, right? And Bell had another great quote along those same lines. Bell said, Alexander Graham Bell, when one door closes, another opens. But we so often look so long and so regretfully at the closed door that we don't see the open door in front of us. And that's
Wow.
another way to say, you can't dwell on the failures. You've got to look at, okay, what else can I do? And I think a lot of Canadian inventors did that. So, like I said, that kind of little ramble I did there about the portaging 2 million lakes and scratching out an existence in this really tough, rugged Canadian shield, it made us very tough, very resilient. We had to be by nature inventive and ingenious to, eke out an existence in this big, difficult, vast country.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I mentioned about the telecommunications, Canada is the largest user of long distance of any country in the world because, of course, we're a country of immigrants. Almost everybody here came from somewhere else, or at least their forefathers did. And so we do a lot of phoning back home, whether that be, all over the globe. And so, again, by nature and necessity of what and how this country is, we had to do those things. And that's one of the reasons Northern Telecom became such a big presence in telecommunications. I mean, people poo-poo it because it crashed and burned. Well, there's a lot of reasoning behind that, and I talk about a bit of that in the book. I won't go into it now. But they became so big in one point in the 1990s, I think it was 1999, that 75% of every single IP packet in the world, the little internet packets, went through a piece of Nortel equipment. 75% of everything on the internet went through a piece of Nortel equipment. That's not leading in your field. That is outright world dominance.
That's right.
And that was all thanks to those inventors and those guys that worked at Northern Tel. And so a lot of those guys had that stick-to-itiveness and perseverance.
Well, it's wonderful that you're bringing awareness to these incredible people, and I like how you I think correctly refer to them as unsung heroes, and it's one of the things for me too. I don't know about you, but when on the occasion you try to just go for a walk, have some silence, and just reflect and think. One of the things I think about is just how far we've come as human beings. To your point, from rocks, sand, minerals, and as you said, through nature and necessity, that's what, it leads to that. You need the right type of people, though, to actually be the ones to respond to that nature and necessity. And you mentioned this idea of sometimes people, especially in the early days, they'd have to go elsewhere in order to get the funding for it. So I'm coming back to this other theme here, Professor Mark. At one point in your book, you write the following about Norman Brecky, the inventor of the paint roller. Okay. Canadian, the inventor of the paint roller. You write, and I'm just quoting you here. In a familiar Canadian refrain, he died before being able to patent his invention and had never made any money from it. The inventor of the paint roller. So
sad story.
Now there's this idea of invention and getting funding for your idea, but then there's this whole separate area about patenting. And for me, I guess I'll Google that, and I'm sure I'm going to see some kind of company that's going to maybe try to take a cut of my idea. And where's that going? Can you talk about the barriers to patenting and how we might address that in Canada? Especially, this is, this podcast is especially aimed at a business audience. We got a lot of people here who have ideas.
Yeah, well, I like that question too, because I actually was asked that a lot by my students, a lot of really bright students, and I've had some amazing ones, and they said, is this possible? Could we invent something? Could we do that? And I said, well, sure. We started out in this country as a bunch of guys portaging over lakes and fur trappers and hunters hunting buffalo. And we went and built a Canadarm and Dexter, the two most complicated devices. And they're not even on this planet. They're out in space, hurtling above us at 400 kilometers an hour right now. And so, yeah, it absolutely is possible, but you have to be very careful. My advice would be, having researched so much in this book, number one, if you come up with a really solid idea, and you got to be careful because a lot of people come up with some gizmo in their garage, which either has already been done or they think, oh, I'll go get this manufactured. Well, you could get slaughtered because we have a lot of places in the world that can cheaply manufacture stuff and rip it off. So you don't want to do that. I would highly advise that the first thing you got to do is you don't want to get also, when you mentioned a lot of these companies, they're a dime a dozen, I think, a lot of these scam companies that take your invention and tell you they're going to look into marketing it and give you a report, and they charge you an arm and a leg for it. So, I'm sure there's good ones, but I'd be very wary of anything like that. I think the number one thing you got to do is, if you come up with an idea or device even, is you've got to patent it before you get the word out. Don't start telling friends, look what I did, because that's how it's going to get stolen. Number two, find yourself a really good intellectual property lawyer, called an IP, intellectual property, IP lawyer. And make sure that they help you through the patenting process, get it patented, and then talk to companies. Try and find, the best thing to do is to approach somebody in that particular field and see if you can get somebody to buy or license the product if they think it's good enough. Because trying to manufacture yourself is very difficult. Now, a lot of inventions nowadays, as you know, it's a digital world. All Steve Jobs did was he drew a picture of somebody holding a flat panel and swiping with their finger. That was Steve Jobs' invention. He had no clue how to do it because he was a visionary guy, not a tech guy. But you can do that without having perfected a circuit. That's more of patenting an idea. And one of the disputes that I talk about in the book with Bell, he had to defend his patent 600 times, 600 court cases that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Wow. And
so I laugh when I saw, I could pull 5 books off my shelf here, American textbooks, that tell you that Alicia Gray and Anthony Minucci, and I could rhyme off a whole bunch of others, all invented the telephone and not Bell. Poppycock, 600 court cases. He presented the evidence and he won. So I think I'll take 600 court judges up to the Supreme Court claiming that Bell is the inventor. But he had to defend it that much, and only because he was able to patent it and he could prove it with a letter he wrote to his father more than 2 years before, back at his home in Brantford, Ontario, saying, do you remember the day when I was sitting on the banks of the Grand River in Brantford, Ontario, and he's throwing pebbles in the water, and he came up and conceived with the idea of how to do it. And that letter was the basis of the evidence that defended that patent. So if anybody's going to invent something, get an IP lawyer, get that rock solid patent, and then start talking about it. Until then, you don't mention a word to anybody.
That is terrific advice, and
Thank you.
A good reason not to just go right to Google and to whatever
Big
companies
Brother is always watching.
Right, to take your idea. Yes, either you typing it in and giving it to a company, or who knows who's watching what you're typing in, and especially if it's that big idea.
One last point on that, I'd highly encourage anybody that really has the smarts, and I mean, really has something different. 2 of the greatest inventors of modern day right now, most people don't realize, are Canadian or Canadian connections. I mean, Mike Lazaridis come up with the BlackBerry, and look at where they got to. I mean, they essentially had took the world by storm in the late 2000s. Right up to the U.S. president was using a BlackBerry, but he was addicted to it.
Yeah.
And also Elon Musk, which a lot of people revere. Most people don't realize his mother's Canadian, and he grew up here for a lot of his time, went to Carleton University. And I mean, geez, took on the big 3 auto manufacturers and competes with them daily, and is sending missions to the space station and getting ready to go to Mars. I mean, what an inspiration. And so, it can be done, but you really got to be careful and lay the groundwork carefully to protect yourself, today.
Mark, the passion is palpable. You obviously care so much about this topic. The book is the first 3 printings of your book sold out in 18 months. The 4th edition.
I just got the 4th. Can I show it to you?
Yeah.
So there's my 4th printing, close to the camera here.
Love it.
And that's right on the front there. As you can see, 4th printing, 4,000 copies in print. I couldn't believe, I wasn't sure I could sell 50 copies of this book when I got my first printing. I did 100 on chance, and I've now got thousands of copies sold, 65 stores across the country, and I've been speaking all across the country at museums and conferences about it. And I just can't believe, like up before COVID, I had the request pouring in at 2 or 3 a week to come and speak about it, because it really seems to have hit a nerve. And I'm really happy about that. It's quite a fluke. I really didn't expect that I'd be able to sell more than 100 copies, but every time I do a presentation, I get 3 or 4 requests to come do another one somewhere else. So I'd love to get out there and spread the word about it. At any museum, conference, historical society, whatever you got, I'm happy to spread the word, because, like you said, it really is my passion. It's become my pet project here in retirement.
Absolutely, Mark. And the passion with which you talk about the subject comes through in the writing as well. And more colorful now too, right? Over 300 photos, 100 in color, full color. Yeah. And I guess the year ahead for you, as we wrap up here, is promoting this book and hopefully getting back into those, those places where people are most interested. Museums, Rotary clubs, other libraries. Hopefully, I bet you missed that.
I miss my days like you. I really admire people like yourself, professors that are still in the trenches. I mean, this has been a very, very tough year in education and academia, and I very luckily retired in 2019 and missed this craziness because it's been very difficult for people like you. And I really tip my hat to you and all the other professors out there. But yeah, for me, this was my retirement gig. I started to do all these speaking gigs, and so I get to do my lecturing that I used to love to do in class. I've really enjoyed that part of it, going across the country and meeting all these people. I've actually met relations and people that are connected to the book. I met a lady who worked right on the line of the Avro Arrow. I was thrilled to death to shake her hand. She was one of the ones laid off in 1957 on Black Friday. I met Reginald Fessenden's second or third cousin, who actually remembered meeting him as a child. And that's been really fun for me to go across the country and talk about this book. Like I say, at all these different conferences and museums and libraries. And I'd love to do more of that, because it's such a joy to have all these people go, wow, we did this. This is fantastic. And it just has brought so much happiness to many people that didn't know we did all this stuff. I didn't know we did all this until I started to do the research.
Well, I agree. And, I'd say, I'd wish you luck, but I don't think you need it. I think we just need things to open back up. And this book is going to be selling like hotcakes again. But for anyone in the interim who wants to know more about Professor Mark Rector or order the book, go to professormarkrector.com. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Professor Mark, thank you so much for talking with me today. I love this conversation.
Thank you, John. I can't thank you enough for inviting me to your podcast. I think you've got a great angle here. I tried to push my students towards jobs, careers, entrepreneurship. It's a great way to make a lot of money, having your own job and or finding a good career. And we need more in education. And so I tip my hat to you for doing this kind of podcast. It's really good stuff. So I highly recommend people to take a listen to John's other podcasts. They're really well done.
Thanks a lot, Mark. It's definitely about passion at work. So thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, John. Take care.